Welcome to K2 Crest Audiobooks Hub. Listening to books is very important. Why? Because it saves your time. You can learn while driving, walking, or cleaning. It makes you smarter every day, without extra effort. So get ready. Today we will talk about a new book. This book will change our lives forever. Feel the energy. Let's go.
Let's start the book. Talking to Strangers. Introduction: Why we always misread strangers. We navigate our lives surrounded by people we do not know, yet we operate under the dangerous assumption that we can easily read their minds and intentions. Malcolm Gladwell's brilliant and unsettling book, Talking to Strangers, dismantles this profound arrogance by exposing the fatal flaws in how we judge those outside our inner circles. Through gripping historical events, devastating criminal cases, and cutting-edge psychological research, the book reveals why our instincts constantly betray us when dealing with unfamiliar faces. You will discover why judges are routinely outperformed by simple computer algorithms, why well-intentioned police training leads to tragic misunderstandings, and why our evolutionary wiring makes us inherently vulnerable to deception. This summary will guide you through the fascinating science of human interaction, offering you a radically new lens through which to view the world. By the end of this journey, you will not only understand the hidden mechanisms of social friction, but also learn how to approach the unknown with a renewed sense of humility, patience, and grace. Point 1. Why you naturally believe absolute liars. Let us start by looking at a question that has baffled almost everyone at some point. How do massive, audacious frauds go completely unnoticed for years by highly intelligent professionals? We often look at the victims of financial scams, political espionage, or romantic deception and privately think that we would have been much smarter, that we would have spotted the red flags from a mile away. But the deeply humbling truth is that human beings are fundamentally hardwired to believe what other people tell them. We do not operate like skeptical detectives constantly searching for lies. Instead, we operate under a psychological principle that the brilliant communication researcher Tim Levine calls the truth default theory. To understand how powerful this default setting is, we need to look at how easily we are manipulated, not just by petty thieves, but by the most sophisticated liars in history. Consider the astonishing case of Ana Montes, often referred to as the Queen of Cuba. She was one of the highest-ranking analysts at the Defense Intelligence Agency in the United States, a woman trusted with the nation's deepest military secrets regarding Latin America. For years, she was universally respected by her peers, received numerous commendations, and was seen as a model intelligence officer. Yet for her entire career, she was actively spying for Fidel Castro's regime. She was handing over incredibly sensitive information that compromised American operations and endangered lives. How did she get away with it for so long, surrounded by the greatest counterintelligence minds in the world? She passed polygraph tests, she maintained a quiet and unassuming demeanor, and she never acted like a stereotypical spy. Her colleagues had minor suspicions over the years. Perhaps she took a phone call too privately, or perhaps her analysis seemed a bit too sympathetic to Cuba. But they always found innocent explanations for her behavior. They defaulted to truth. When we interact with someone, our brains naturally assume they are being honest, unless we are confronted with overwhelming, undeniable evidence to the contrary. Our initial reaction to strange behavior is never, "This person is a master spy." It is simply, "This person is having an off day." This phenomenon is not limited to the murky world of international espionage. It is the exact same mechanism that allowed Bernie Madoff to execute the largest Ponzi scheme in financial history. Madoff was managing billions of dollars for the world's most sophisticated investors, banks, and charities. His returns were impossibly consistent, a mathematical anomaly that defied the basic laws of the stock market. An independent financial analyst named Harry Markopolos looked at Madoff's numbers and realized within roughly 5 minutes that the entire operation was a massive fraud. Markopolos spent years trying to warn the Securities and Exchange Commission, the media, and the banking industry, but nobody listened to him. Why? Because Madoff was charming, he was a pillar of the Wall Street community, and he sat on the boards of prestigious charities. The people who interacted with Madoff did not want to believe he was a monster. They desperately wanted to believe his story. The threshold for breaking out of the truth default state is incredibly high. We require an avalanche of contradictory evidence before we finally abandon our trust in a stranger. You might be asking yourself why evolution would burden us with such a massive blind spot. If defaulting to truth makes us so vulnerable to predators, liars, and sociopaths, why haven't we evolved to be naturally suspicious? The answer is profoundly beautiful and surprisingly optimistic. Defaulting to truth is not a tragic flaw in the human condition. It is the very foundation of human civilization. If we woke up every morning and demanded absolute proof of honesty from every stranger we met, society would instantly collapse. We would never be able to buy a cup of coffee, board an airplane, or sign a contract without launching a full-scale investigation into the barista, the pilot, or the business partner. Trust is the invisible architecture of our daily lives. We accept the risk of being occasionally deceived because the alternative, living in a state of constant, paralyzing paranoia, is far worse. Harry Markopolos, the man who caught Bernie Madoff, is a perfect example of what happens when you abandon the truth default. Markopolos is a brilliant mathematician, but he lives a life consumed by suspicion. During his investigation, he carried a firearm, obsessively checked under his car for explosive devices, and viewed every interaction through a lens of extreme distrust. He caught the greatest fraudster of our time, but he paid a terrible psychological price for it. We do not want to live in a world where everyone operates like Harry Markopolos. The fact that we are occasionally scammed or lied to is simply the tax we pay for the immense privilege of living in a cooperative, functioning society. Understanding the truth default theory allows us to forgive ourselves when we are fooled. We are not stupid for believing liars. We are simply acting like healthy, socially adapted human beings. Our vulnerability to deception is the exact same trait that allows us to build communities, fall in love, and collaborate with people we just met. Point 2. The deadly illusion of meeting face-to-face. There is an incredibly common scenario in the professional world that perfectly illustrates our overconfidence in reading strangers: the job interview. We insist on flying candidates across the country, sitting them down in a conference room, and looking them in the eye. We deeply believe that by observing their posture, the firmness of their handshake, and the steadiness of their gaze, we can peer into their soul and determine their true character. We elevate the face-to-face meeting to a sacred status, treating it as the ultimate lie detector test. But history and science tell a remarkably different and deeply disturbing story. Meeting a stranger face-to-face does not automatically improve our ability to understand them. In many critical situations, it actually makes us significantly worse at judging their true intentions. To grasp the sheer magnitude of this error, we must look back to the late 1930s as the world stood on the precipice of the Second World War. Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, made a series of unprecedented and highly publicized trips to Germany to meet directly with Adolf Hitler. Chamberlain was a seasoned politician, a man who prided himself on his ability to read people. He spent hours in private conversation with the German dictator, observing his mannerisms, listening to his voice, and looking directly into his eyes. After these meetings, Chamberlain returned to London completely convinced that Hitler was a man of his word, a man who could be trusted to keep the peace in Europe. Chamberlain believed that because he had shared a room with Hitler, he possessed a unique and accurate insight into the dictator's soul. He famously declared that he had secured peace for our time. We all know the catastrophic tragedy that followed. Chamberlain's face-to-face meetings did not reveal the truth, they actively blinded him to it. Contrast Chamberlain's approach with that of Winston Churchill. Churchill did not fly to Germany. He did not sit down for tea with the Führer. Instead, Churchill stayed in London and simply read what Hitler had written in Mein Kampf. He looked at the objective data, the aggressive rhetoric, the territorial demands, the hateful ideology, without the distracting influence of Hitler's personal charm or physical presence. Because Churchill never met Hitler face to face, he saw the monster with absolute clarity. Chamberlain fell victim to what psychologists call the illusion of asymmetric insight. We believe that we can quickly understand a stranger's true nature through a brief physical interaction, even while we simultaneously believe that strangers could never possibly understand our own complex inner lives in the same short amount of time. It is a profound arrogance that has shaped the course of history and continues to ruin lives on a daily basis. This exact same illusion plays out every single day in the criminal justice system, with consequences that are just as devastating on an individual level. Consider the process of setting bail. When a person is arrested, a judge must decide whether to release them pending trial or keep them in a jail cell. The judge must answer a simple but vital question. Is this stranger a flight risk, or are they a danger to the community? To make this decision, judges insist on seeing the defendant in person. They look at the defendant's facial expressions, their remorseful tears, and their respectful demeanor. Surely, a highly trained judge looking directly at a defendant is the best way to make this critical assessment, right? Harvard economist Sendhil Mullainathan and a team of researchers decided to test this assumption. They compared the bail decisions made by human judges, who had the benefit of looking the defendants in the eye, against the decisions made by a simple artificial intelligence algorithm. The computer program could not see the defendants. It did not know if they were crying, if they were wearing a nice suit, or if they avoided eye contact. The algorithm only had access to the objective data, the defendant's age, their criminal record, and the details of their current charge. The results were absolutely staggering. The computer algorithm completely destroyed the human judges in terms of accuracy. The human judges were constantly releasing high-risk individuals who went on to commit violent crimes while out on bail, simply because those dangerous individuals knew how to look polite and remorseful in the courtroom. Conversely, the judges were locking up low-risk individuals who posed no threat simply because those individuals looked nervous, defensive, or unkempt. The human judges were distracted by the very thing they thought was helping them, the face-to-face interaction. We place a massive premium on visual cues, assuming that a person's physical presence provides highly reliable information about their character. We think we are highly attuned human lie detectors, capable of spotting deception in a twitch of an eye or a shift in posture, but the reality is that human behavior is incredibly noisy and deceptive. Sociopaths are often charming, while innocent people are often awkward and defensive. When we meet strangers face to face, we are bombarded with irrelevant sensory information that clouds our judgment and triggers our deepest biases. We must learn to recognize the severe limitations of our own intuition. Sometimes, the only way to truly understand a stranger is to close our eyes, ignore their performance, and focus strictly on the undeniable facts of their behavior. Point 3. When your face betrays your true intentions. We navigate the world operating under a deeply ingrained assumption that people's faces perfectly reflect their internal emotional states. When someone is happy, we expect them to smile broadly. When someone is devastated by grief, we expect them to weep uncontrollably. When someone is surprised, we expect their eyes to widen and their jaw to drop. We treat the human face as a perfectly tuned billboard, broadcasting the precise contents of the soul to anyone willing to look. Psychologists call this belief the illusion of transparency. We are absolutely convinced that the emotional experiences of strangers leak out of their pores and manifest clearly on their faces. But what happens when we encounter a stranger whose face completely betrays their true intentions? What happens when an innocent person simply does not look the way we think an innocent person should look? To understand how fiercely we cling to this illusion, we can look at the world of popular entertainment, specifically iconic television shows like Friends. If you watch an episode of a classic sitcom with the sound completely muted, you will instantly know exactly what each character is feeling. When the character Ross experiences a moment of shock, his eyes bulge out, his hands fly to his head, and his mouth forms a perfect circle of disbelief. It is beautifully clear, highly exaggerated, and universally understood. We love this kind of television because it perfectly aligns with our desire for a transparent world. The actors are highly trained professionals whose job is to make their internal emotions perfectly readable to millions of strangers through a screen. But real life is not a sitcom, and everyday people are not trained actors. In reality, human beings are deeply complex, and our facial expressions often have absolutely nothing to do with what we are actually feeling inside. This brings us to one of the most tragic and misunderstood criminal cases of the modern era, the story of Amanda Knox. Knox was a young American student studying abroad in the picturesque Italian town of Perugia. One horrific morning, her roommate was found brutally murdered in their shared apartment. In the immediate aftermath of the discovery, Knox was thrust into an unimaginable nightmare, surrounded by foreign police officers, flashing cameras, and absolute chaos. It was a situation that would shatter anyone's composure. However, the Italian police quickly decided that Amanda Knox was a cold-blooded killer, but they did not base this initial conclusion on physical evidence, fingerprints, or DNA. They based it entirely on how she behaved in the hours and days following the murder. She was acting weird. According to the police and the rabid international media, Knox simply did not look like an innocent, grieving roommate. While waiting at the police station, she was seen stretching her legs and doing light gymnastics. She was seen kissing and cuddling with her new Italian boyfriend outside the crime scene. She did not cry hysterically when she was questioned. She occasionally smiled a strange, nervous smile. Because she failed to perform the socially acceptable pantomime of grief, the authorities concluded that she must be a psychopathic murderer devoid of human empathy. They constructed an elaborate, fantastical theory of a sex game gone wrong to explain the crime, driven entirely by their absolute disgust at her mismatched facial expressions and physical demeanor. Amanda Knox spent years in an Italian prison for a crime she did not commit, her youth stolen away, simply because she suffered from a tragic mismatch between her internal trauma and her external behavior. Knox is a textbook example of what psychologists refer to as a mismatched sender. A matched sender is someone whose face perfectly aligns with their feelings. The people who look terrified when they are scared and look guilty when they have done something wrong. The police officers in Perugia were operating under the false assumption that everyone in the world is a matched sender, but a significant portion of the human population is mismatched. There are innocent people who smile uncontrollably when they are terrified. There are deeply grieving people who become completely stoic and emotionally paralyzed when faced with trauma. There are honest people who cannot maintain eye contact to save their lives. When a truth teller acts like a liar, our social radar completely breaks down. We must aggressively challenge our reliance on the illusion of transparency in our daily lives. Think about the last time you misjudged a coworker because they seemed aloof, only to discover later that they were just intensely focused or struggling with personal anxiety. Think about how many times a nervous laugh has been misinterpreted as a sign of disrespect. We are constantly demanding that strangers perform their emotions for us in a way that we find comfortable and recognizable. When they fail to do so, we instantly brand them as suspicious, deceptive, or dangerous. To truly understand strangers, we have to stop reading their faces like a simple children's book. We have to accept the profound disconnect between the chaos of the human mind and the limitations of physical expression, realizing that a nervous smile might just be a cry for help, and a stoic stare might be the mask of an innocent person trying to survive. Point 4. How extreme contexts distort our social radar. There is a widely accepted cultural myth that extreme situations, particularly those involving heavy intoxication, serve as a magical truth serum. We love to promote the idea that alcohol simply strips away our polite societal filters and reveals the raw, unvarnished truth of who we really are. We say things like, "A drunk mind speaks a sober heart." We assume that if someone behaves aggressively, affectionately, or recklessly while intoxicated, the alcohol merely unlocked their hidden desires. But cognitive psychology reveals a much darker and far more complex reality. When we examine how strangers interact under extreme conditions, we discover that alcohol does not reveal the true self. Instead, it completely destroys the psychological mechanisms we rely on to navigate the social world, leading to catastrophic miscommunications and tragic consequences. To understand why strangers fail so miserably to understand each other in environments like crowded bars or chaotic fraternity parties, we must explore a powerful psychological concept known as alcohol myopia. The pioneering researcher Claude Steele spent years studying exactly how alcohol chemically alters our cognitive processing. What he discovered fundamentally changes how we should view intoxication. Alcohol does not make you a different person, and it certainly does not make you a more honest person. What alcohol does is aggressively shrink your field of vision. It destroys your brain's ability to process complex, peripheral, or long-term information, forcing you to focus exclusively on the most immediate, highly salient cues directly in front of your face. You become profoundly myopic, psychologically nearsighted. Imagine you are sober and someone insults you at a dinner party. Your brain rapidly processes a vast array of information. You register the insult, but you also process the peripheral cues. You realize that you are in a nice restaurant, that causing a scene would be deeply embarrassing, that your friends are watching, and that the person who insulted you might just be having a bad day. Because you can process all these complex, long-term consequences, you choose to politely walk away. Now imagine the exact same scenario, but you are heavily intoxicated. The alcohol myopia kicks in. The peripheral cues, the embarrassment, the social setting, the long-term consequences completely vanish from your cognitive radar. The only thing your brain can process is the immediate glaring cue directly in front of you, the insult. Stripped of all context and restraint, you react aggressively. You did not punch the person because you are secretly a violent monster. You punched them because your brain was temporarily blinded to every single reason why you shouldn't. This exact same cognitive blindness is at the dark heart of so many devastating encounters between young strangers, particularly in cases of sexual assault on college campuses. Gladwell explores the heartbreaking tragedy of the Brock Turner and Chanel Miller case, a horrific event that occurred outside a fraternity party at Stanford University. While we must absolutely hold perpetrators fully accountable for their horrific choices, understanding the mechanics of alcohol myopia helps explain how these environments become breeding grounds for profound misunderstanding. When two heavily intoxicated strangers are trying to navigate the incredibly complex, subtle dance of consent, they are attempting an impossible task. Consent requires the ability to read nuanced facial expressions, body language, hesitation, and verbal cues. It requires emotional intelligence and the ability to process the long-term implications of an intimate encounter. But under the heavy influence of alcohol, both strangers are suffering from severe myopia. They are completely incapable of reading the subtle signs of discomfort or hesitation in their partner. They can only process the most immediate, simplistic cues, perhaps a smile or an initial willingness to go to a quiet room. The drunken brain latches onto these immediate cues and completely ignores the massive flashing warning signs that the situation is deteriorating or that consent has not been clearly given or understood. A fraternity party is an environment intentionally designed to push strangers together while simultaneously stripping them of the very cognitive tools they need to understand each other. If we want to reduce the friction and tragedy in human interactions, we have to stop treating alcohol as a harmless social lubricant or a magical truth serum. We must recognize that extreme environments radically alter human behavior, turning normally empathetic people into dangerously myopic actors who are deaf and blind to the complex social signals of those around them. When we judge the actions of strangers, we cannot simply look at their behavior in a vacuum. We must look deeply at the context in which that behavior occurred. We cannot expect people to successfully navigate the intricate, delicate process of reading a stranger's mind when their own minds have been chemically stripped of the ability to see anything beyond the immediate moment. Point 5. The hidden power of physical location. We have a deep-seated psychological habit of blaming a person's character for their actions, completely ignoring the invisible but massive influence of their physical environment. When we hear that someone committed a crime, took their own life, or engaged in reckless behavior, our immediate instinct is to look inward at their personality. We assume that if a person has a desire to do something, they will simply find a way to do it regardless of where they are or what obstacles stand in their way. But scientists and sociologists have uncovered a radical truth about human nature. Our deepest, most private actions are often inextricably linked to highly specific places and contexts. This concept is known as coupling, and understanding it completely revolutionizes how we should look at the strangers around us. To fully grasp the staggering power of coupling, we must look at a story that is as heartbreaking as it is scientifically illuminating: the suicide of the brilliant poet Sylvia Plath. During a brutally cold winter in London, suffering from severe depression, Plath tragically ended her own life by placing her head inside her kitchen oven and turning on the gas. At the time, the vast majority of homes in the United Kingdom were powered by what was known as town gas, a remarkably lethal substance heavily laced with carbon monoxide. For decades, the town gas oven was the leading method of suicide in Britain. It was incredibly easy, completely painless, and readily available in almost every single kitchen. But eventually, the British government decided to modernize their infrastructure, transitioning the entire country away from the deadly town gas to the much safer, cleaner natural gas we use today. What do you think happened to the suicide rate in the United Kingdom after this massive infrastructural change? The traditional assumption about human nature would suggest that the suicide rate would remain exactly the same. We assume that a deeply depressed person is determined to die, and if you take away their preferred method, they will simply find another way. They will jump from a bridge, take pills, or use a firearm. But that is not what happened. When the lethal town gas was removed from British homes, the national suicide rate plummeted massively, and it never went back up. The people who would have used the ovens did not substitute another method. They simply did not commit suicide. Their tragic impulse was strictly coupled to the specific, easy, and immediate presence of the town gas oven. When the specific context was removed, the behavior simply vanished. This exact same phenomenon has been observed at the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, a location that has tragically drawn thousands of people looking to end their lives. A brilliant psychologist named Richard Seiden decided to track down over 500 individuals who had been physically stopped from jumping off the bridge by police or bystanders. He wanted to know what happened to these strangers years later. Did they just go find another bridge? Did they find another method? The data was definitive and astonishing. Over 90% of the people stopped from jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge never went on to commit suicide. Their intense psychological despair was inextricably coupled to the romanticized, highly specific location of that exact bridge. If you stop them from jumping in that specific moment, at that specific place, you save their lives permanently. The power of coupling extends far beyond the realm of mental health. It is the hidden architecture of crime and social friction. Criminologists have long known that crime does not blanket a city evenly. It is astonishingly concentrated. In almost every major city, a massive percentage of violent crime occurs on a tiny fraction of street segments, often just a few specific intersections or alleyways. Crime is heavily coupled to highly specific environments characterized by poor lighting, abandoned buildings, and a lack of community oversight. A stranger who might act like a dangerous criminal on a specific, chaotic street corner might act like a perfectly peaceful citizen just 3 blocks away in a different context. We consistently fail to understand strangers because we ignore the immense power of coupling. We meet a stranger in a stressful, hostile environment, and we instantly assume they are a hostile person. We see someone make a terrible mistake in a moment of extreme temptation, and we label them a fundamentally flawed human being. We completely strip away the context, the physical location, and the immediate pressures that shape their behavior. If we want to truly understand the people we do not know, we have to stop solely interrogating their character and start paying deep attention to their environment. We must realize that human behavior is not a fixed, immovable trait. It is a fluid, dynamic reaction to the specific world a person happens to be standing in at that exact moment. Point 6. The tragic escalation of a routine traffic stop. Consider for a moment how we train our police officers to interact with the public. We give them a badge, a gun, and a mandate to protect society, and we send them out onto the streets to encounter dozens of strangers every single day. But what happens when the very training designed to keep us safe becomes the exact mechanism that causes an interaction to spiral into an unnecessary tragedy? To understand the ultimate catastrophic failure of talking to strangers, we must examine the heartbreaking case of Sandra Bland, a young African-American woman whose life ended in devastation following a completely routine traffic stop in rural Texas. Her story is a masterclass in how mismatched expectations, aggressive institutional training, and a complete lack of context can turn a minor annoyance into a deadly confrontation. The incident began on a sunny afternoon near the campus of Prairie View A&M University. A Texas state trooper named Brian Encinia was patrolling the highway. He saw Sandra Bland switch lanes without using her turn signal, a remarkably minor infraction that millions of drivers commit every day. Encinia pulled her over. When we look at the dashboard camera footage and listen to the audio transcript of this encounter, we see a textbook example of social friction escalating out of control. Encinia approached the car looking for suspicious behavior. He was trained, like thousands of officers across the country, to view every single traffic stop as a potential gateway to a major crime. This strategy was born out of the Kansas City preventive patrol experiments of the 1990s, where police aggressively stopped cars in high-crime hotspots to actively search for illegal weapons and drugs. In those highly specific, heavily coupled environments, the aggressive stops worked. But police departments made a fatal error. They took a strategy meant for violent hotspots and applied it everywhere, to everyone, even a young woman driving on a quiet college campus road. As Encinia questioned Bland, he noticed that she was visibly annoyed. She was frustrated that she was being constantly tailed by a police car and pulled over for a trivial reason. She was a mismatched sender. To Encinia, a normal, innocent person should be completely deferential, apologetic, and terrified of his authority. Because Bland was irritated and confident, Encinia's training kicked in. He assumed her irritation was a cover for a deeper crime. He asked her to put out her cigarette. She legally declined, pointing out that she was in her own car. What should have been a moment of de-escalation instantly became a battle of egos. Encinia felt his authority was being challenged by a stranger who refused to play by his expected script. He ordered her out of the car, brandished his taser, and screamed that he would light her up. A minor traffic ticket instantly escalated into a felony arrest for assaulting a public servant. Tragically, 3 days later, unable to post bail and suffering under the immense stress of the situation, Sandra Bland took her own life in her jail cell. The tragedy of Sandra Bland is the culmination of every single failure we have discussed. Officer Encinia defaulted to suspicion instead of defaulting to truth, completely abandoning the foundational trust required for society to function. He suffered from the illusion of transparency, assuming that Bland's angry facial expressions and annoyed tone were undeniable proof of dangerous criminality, completely ignoring the fact that any normal citizen would be highly irritated in that exact scenario. He completely ignored the concept of coupling, taking highly aggressive, invasive policing tactics designed for violent crime hotspots and deploying them against a civilian on a safe rural road. He created the very anomaly he was trained to spot. Encia made Sandra Bland nervous and angry, and then he arrested her for being nervous and angry. This tragic encounter forces us to deeply question how we approach the strangers in our own lives, even when we are not wearing a badge. How often do we provoke a negative reaction from a stranger through our own aggressive or suspicious behavior, only to blame them for the resulting conflict? How often do we demand that strangers completely suppress their own emotions and conform to our exact expectations of politeness, punishing them severely when they fail to do so? The Sandra Bland case is a haunting reminder that when we approach the unknown with a rigid script, armed with suspicion, and blinded by our own authority, the results are almost always disastrous. We must learn to step back, de-escalate, and recognize that a stranger's frustration is rarely a threat. It is usually just a human being having a difficult day. Point 7. The conclusion. So, where does all this leave us when we step out of our front doors and face a world full of strangers? We have journeyed through the dark corners of international espionage, the tragic flaws of the criminal justice system, the chemical blindness of intoxication, and the devastating escalation of roadside traffic stops. The overarching lesson from Gladwell's profound exploration is not that we should retreat into our homes, lock our doors, and view every unfamiliar face as a potential threat. In fact, the exact opposite is true. The ultimate takeaway from talking to strangers is a powerful call for radical humility, boundless patience, and a fundamental restructuring of how we judge the people we do not know. First and foremost, we must absolutely accept our inherent inability to perfectly read the minds of others. We have to let go of the supreme arrogance that convinces us we can look into a stranger's eyes during a 5-minute interview or a brief conversation and know exactly who they are. We are not human lie detectors. We are deeply flawed observers, easily distracted by the noise of facial expressions, nervous habits, and superficial charm. Recognizing this limitation is not a weakness, it is a profound strength. When we accept that we are bad at reading strangers, we naturally slow down our judgment. We stop jumping to devastating conclusions about a coworker's character based on a single, awkward interaction. We become more forgiving of the mismatched senders in our lives, the innocent people who smile when they are nervous, or the grieving people who cannot seem to shed a tear. We must stop demanding that the world perform its emotions for our personal convenience. Secondly, we must actively embrace the truth default theory, even knowing the risks it carries. Yes, defaulting to truth means that we might occasionally be scammed, deceived, or lied to. We might occasionally fall victim to the Bernie Madoffs of the world. But we must remember that a society that defaults to truth is a society that functions, creates, and loves. The alternative is living in a perpetual state of exhausting paranoia, treating every neighbor, teacher, and barista like a criminal mastermind. We must accept that vulnerability is the unavoidable cost of a connected life. When someone breaks that trust, the fault lies entirely with the deceiver, not with the trusting victim. We should never apologize for believing the best in people because that very belief is what holds the fabric of our civilization together. Finally, we must continually respect the invisible power of context. We cannot truly understand a stranger without understanding the specific physical, emotional, and environmental world they are standing in. We have to look at the coupling of behaviors. Before we condemn someone for a terrible decision, we must ask ourselves what immediate pressures, what extreme environments, or what chemical influences were blinding them to the consequences of their actions. Understanding context does not mean we excuse terrible behavior, but it does mean we address the root causes of that behavior rather than simply demonizing the individual. It means we stop aggressive policing on quiet streets. We recognize the inherent dangers of alcohol-fueled environments, and we build safer bridges instead of just blaming the people who jump. To talk to strangers successfully, we do not need better interrogation techniques, sharper intuition, or more aggressive suspicion. What we desperately need is grace. We need the grace to allow strangers to be complex, confusing, and contradictory. We need the grace to listen to their words rather than obsessing over their facial expressions. And we need the grace to realize that every stranger we meet is navigating a private, chaotic world that we can never fully comprehend. When we replace our arrogance with humility and our suspicion with empathy, we finally open the door to genuine connection. We stop talking at strangers, and we finally begin to understand them.
Thank you for listening. Now do these 3 things. 1. Subscribe so you never miss a life-changing book. 2. Like this video. It helps us grow. 3. Share. Send this to one person you love. Yes, one person you love, because they deserve to change their life too. See you next time. Keep listening. Keep winning. Bye for now.